and a season for every activity under the heavens.
A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot.
A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build.
A time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance.
A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing.
A time to search, and a time to give up, a time to keep, and a time to throw away.
A time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak.
A time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace.
What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race.
He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity into the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end.
Time matters to us, doesn't it? When things start, when things don't start. Have you ever showed up to a meeting and no one else is there and you just kind of wonder, what is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? Our culture is consumed with time. I don't know if you've caught that. You have to realize even in your own life, in your own world, that you are consumed by time. How many of you wear watches? How many of you don't wear a watch? How many of you check your phone all the time to see what time it is? Now, there's the other half of the hand. We just, the time thing, we can't get away with it. I mean, we have them in our cars, we have them on our phones, everywhere we go. We're driven by time. We want to use our time well. We speak and we get paid by the hour in time. We think about life of spending our time, or we even talk about wasting time. We talk about the 24 hours that we have in our time. We don't have enough time. We're late to things. We need more time in order to get things done. We even change our clocks back an hour to play with our mind to make us think we have more time. But we haven't added more time. We've added more sunlight hours, but we think we've added more time. We have this great desire to grasp and control and be consumed by the times that we have. And it's something that is definitely cultural. If you don't believe me, just go to another country somewhere and realize their timetable. There usually isn't one. I remember many times in many countries, whether it's in Haiti or in West Africa that I've been, and you'll start a church service, and there may be 10 or 15 people, and up in the hills, especially in Grand Guave in Haiti. And I remember this, that by the time preaching, in the middle of the preaching, you look into the darkness, and you have the lanterns lit everywhere, and you have 250 or more people now all of a sudden scattered, because there's no watches, there's no time. You know what time it is for church? When you hear church start amongst the mountains, and you hear the singing of the people, the 15 people beginning to go through the valleys, and people know, okay, it's time, and they begin to gather their kids up, because there's no concept of what time is. It's kind of a beautiful thing to step into a culture like that, that's not so consumed by time. And here's Solomon in this book of Ecclesiastes, in this pursuit of understanding life, of the meaning of life. It's something we all wrestle with. Solomon in his wisdom is struggling in his older age. He has written in chapters 1 and 2 this unheartedly, just meaningless, we're chasing after the wind, there's nothing new under the sun. And remember last week, that's an important phrase that's to capture. Life under the sun is just a life lived as if God does not exist. I have no perspective of God. I just look at the world as it is with no concept of eternity, of a creator, of anyone. And he says it's meaningless. I can't grasp or understand it when he talks about life under the sun. And yet he never uses the phrase life above the sun. I'm going to introduce that to us because I believe that's the life we want. And he goes there occasionally. He lifts his head up from what is below the sun and lifts it above the sun, and it begins to enlighten, brings God into the mix, and it begins to wrestle with God's place in the midst of our humanity, in the midst of our wrestling. What is God doing here, which is above everything? And it helps us to understand this idea of this time frame, these seasons that he writes for us in this text. It's important for us to grasp this because it is the season word that he kind of talks about here. Solomon in his wisdom is wrestling with this, and each season has a value. We like that word season. There are some things we like that are just seasons, like 2-year-olds, right? Any parent in here, 2-year-old, you thank thank the Lord for it's a season. This is not behavior from here on till eternity. We like that. Teenager, aren't we glad? I mean, nothing against teenagers. Appreciate you very much, but it's good to be a season. How many of you as an adults go, I'm glad I don't have to go back and do junior high over again? Amen? Who wants to do, right? Even you agree with me. They just don't want to go there again. There's no high schooler that wants to go back to that stage either. It's just a hard stage. We like that there are things that are seasons, but we also like that there's some things we wish there weren't a season. Vacation? Yeah, it's like, no, we don't want vacation to be a season. It's like everybody hates Friday of vacation, don't you? It's like, oh, we got to start packing and how are we going to get back? And you start thinking about, you don't like that. We don't want it to be a season. We want it to be longer. But it is a good word that describes life, seasons. In this room, there are seasons of life. Those are in the older, those in the younger. It's a broad spectrum in between it. There's this season. Peter uses a different word, actually, to describe seasons. He uses this phrase, a little while, in 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7. Because he's talking about this difficulty in life, this hardship of life, just as well as Solomon was looking at it. Said, this is not an easy thing to live. But Peter uses this phrase in a different way. He goes, in all of this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, season, you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, or greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. You see, Peter takes this perspective and he says, it's a little while, it's a season of suffering and grief, but it is to prove a genuine faith. I can identify with that. That encourages me. That helps me know that what I'm going through is refining me. It's sanctifying me. That God is saying that here are these seasons of life, whether you're a believer or not a believer, everything that Solomon wrote in those 14 seasons is humanity. We cannot escape them. You will engage in them in some way or another. We're going to talk more about this in a little bit. But when we begin to live above the sun, when we begin to believe and know that God is working in us and through us in these moments of life, good or bad, then I begin to realize it is to create in me a genuine faith. It gets rid of, especially the difficulties, they get rid of the things that I don't need anymore. They gets rid of sometimes the bitterness in my heart because I go through a difficult time and all of a sudden grace is applied and all of a sudden I've been transformed by that moment. And it's important for us to remember that as we journey in and out of seasons of life, it is for our good. That's hard for us to grasp. Because there's seasons we don't like. There's seasons we don't want to deal with. There's seasons we'd rather not deal with our children or our grandchildren. They're struggling through life. We don't want to deal with those seasons when we're dealing through those difficulties. When we're in marriage that's difficult and we're fighting and just not getting along. It's a season we don't like. But in that season, it produces things in our life. And there's some seasons we bring on ourselves. There's some seasons we just find. Go to the doctor and you find out you have cancer. That's not a season anybody signs up for. But it is a season. It's a component that we wrestle with. And so Solomon uses this concept of season, and he uses them. Actually, there's 14 pairs of contrasting groups, or 7 pairs of 7, actually. It's actually, numerically, if you look at scriptures, numbers always kind of matter. And Solomon, in his poetic form, is actually writing this and saying there's a complete seasons. There's 7 sevens here, but they kind of oppose each other here. And I want to work our way through them a little bit, just little statements on each one, moving our way through. But I'm going to need your help a little bit, so we may need you on the slides and moving through because they're opposing, right? So I'm going to kind of say the first part, and you can just kind of help out in the other part, because otherwise you could get bored over going through all these, and I want you to engage with you this morning a little bit and be a part of this. So here's the first one. I'll read the first half, and then you can read the end, all right? So first one, there's a time for birth, and then there's a time for... Sounds pretty obvious, doesn't it? I grasp this. There is a season for us to be born, and there's a season for us to die. Now, we don't like to think about the latter, but both of these, as Solomon talks about, are things on the whole are not in our control. We don't control when we are born. We had no bearing on that whatsoever. Have you ever stopped and wondered why you were born where you were born? Has anybody wrestled with that? Just for a moment, right? All the time. I'm seeing a hand back there. Why was I born in the time I was born? Why was I born in the family I was born into? Why was I born into this nationality? Why was I born into this country? The list, this city, it can go on and on, because those are things we didn't choose. We had no bearing on it. We didn't have a vote to go, no, not that one, that family. No, not that family. That wasn't a part of it. And in the midst of this journey, that we realize that there is a God who is working, and we are born into this history, this massive history of humanity. In all reality, even though for us it feels like we live a long time, we're really, as scriptures say, a vapor. We come, we go. It's short. Even if you live to be 100 years old, in all time and eternity, it's a short period of time. And it teaches us that. Matter of fact, even with our death, we have very little control over that. We do have more control over our death than maybe our birth. But even in Psalm 139, verse 16, it says this: "Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." God knows our journey, short or long, good or bad. He understands and has a time frame of our own life. But he moves from life, from birth to death. He moves to time to plant and a time to uproot. It's agriculture. So how many of you like the spring over the fall? Which one do you like best? Spring. How many spring folks? How many fall folks? Ooh, we got more fall folks. We could have a poll, and then we could do a blog. Never mind, we'll go that far to figure all that out. But there's this sense of this seasons. We love seasons here. Some places in the world don't have seasons, but we love the seasons of planting, of watching things grow, watching them produce and harvest. And there's a time to pull. I remember watching my father. My dad had converted. There was 7 of us in our family, and he converted our whole backyard to garden. I mean, from end to end, to corner, and it was wide. I mean, rows and rows of green beans and corn and strawberries, grapes, fruit trees, rhubarb, which I love to just cut rhubarb and eat it like celery. Has anybody else ever done that before? Amen. Is it good? Just don't eat the leaves. I'm going to say this because don't eat the leaves, they're poisonous. So I wanted to clarify that real quick before somebody goes out and goes, "Hey, let's make a salad." Don't do that, all right? Those aren't good, just the stalks. But Dad would work. I mean, he planted, and he would work hard, and then he would weed and weed and weed. And there was a time where my dad planted, and there was a time my dad uprooted. Because some things that were in the garden weren't supposed to be in the garden. He didn't want them in the garden. In order for the harvest to occur, there had to be some uprooting. And Solomon goes, there's times in our life that we plant, we invest in lives, we invest in relationships, we start something new, maybe even something like this. I consider this as a time of planting for reunion, a time for new relationships, of people coming in and joining together. It's a time of that. And yet there's also a time of uprooting. It's a time in our discipline of faith to go, I need to take that out of my life. I need to submit and allow Christ to do that. He needs to cleanse me and move me. And there's a season for uprooting. He goes on and says there's a time to kill and a time to... There you go. This is a sad truth. How many of you got up this morning and listened to the news? Not many of you, a few of you did. How many were killed in Indianapolis last night? I know at least 3 or 4 between the hours of 2 o'clock and about 6 this morning that there were 3 or 4 killed. There's grieving right now. Now, in this sense of saying that there's a season doesn't mean like this is what we need to go out and do, but it's saying when you look at humanity, this is going on all around us. There's a season of death. There's a season of killing that's going on. Right in the midst of that, we have also a season of healing, a time of healing. There's actually, it's interesting because as those people who are out there hating and killing, there's also another set waiting in the hospital to heal and restore and to save life. Eskenazi was busy this morning. It's a sad truth, but it is a truth that occurs in our world and occurs around us. And there's a times that we need to heal things and restore things, and a time that relationally that we need to do that as well. All right, moving along. A time to tear down and a time to build. I love fixer-upper shows, right? How many of your fans are a fixer-upper on HGTV? Everybody know what I'm talking about? We should take a road trip. Has anybody thought of that? Like just go down and just go to, I'm seeing hands. We could do that this summer. Everybody go down and just, there's something beautiful about taking something that really should be torn down. And of course, the favorite day of Chip Gaines is demo day, right? it's demo day. And he goes tearing things up. Why? Because they have an image of what can be beautiful. But the only way it can become beautiful is if you take the steps to tear down. And there are a lot of things in our life, in our world, that there's a season that's got to come down. But in order that we can be built and to be rebuilt, and I think there's a part of that, even in my spiritual journey, I had to come to a point of wrestling that I was a sinful man. I was a person who had done wrong, thought wrong, behaved, you name it, it's there. And it's sin, and it's separated from God. And I had to realize, I had to be literally tearing myself down to what I really was and not what I thought I was, in order that God could go, I can take that. I can demo that. And at the end of your life, we can walk through and we can watch something that's beautiful because you begin to live in relationship with me and begin to restore me. It's something beautiful. Moving along, there's two now. We're going to start just on this personal level. A time to weep and a time to mourn and a time to... There's almost a progression here on these two as they're combined. It's time to weep and then a time to mourn. In other words, there's certain things that I may cry over, but mourn, that's also a deeper personal level. There's a time when I may just shed a tear when something is done or happens, or I'm watching a movie, and yeah, I cry at movies, so don't take my card away from me, all right? I cry at movies, but I don't. Mourning is something different, though. Mourning is deep. Mourning is painful. Mourning is grief and loss, and those are moments that we have in our life. And a lot of us can share stories of those losses in our life, but there's also a time to laugh. There's just a good time to laugh. I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't laugh enough. And it's just so fun to be around some people all of a sudden, and you just start laughing and laughing and laughing. And it's just kind of really good. Beth and I went to go see My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2. And I'm not promoting the movie. I'm just saying we went to it. And as we went into the previews, we were in there there was probably, 30, 40 people in there. And people were laughing at the previews. I've never been to a movie where people laughed at the previews and commercials. I'm like, what is up with this crowd? I mean, they're just kind of just happy. And sure enough, as that movie started, there was more guffawing out loud, more people. I joined in. I just started. I laughed out loud, louder than I normally would have at a public, movie. And it was just all of a sudden it was contagious. And I think there's something beautiful when we just realize that there is a good, healthy time to laugh. There's a good, healthy time even to dance and to enjoy life. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. It is a part of our journey together and learning to celebrate and to grieve with one another. It's also knowing that even though we may be in a season of grief and mourning, that there is joy. I like how he puts these opposed to each other. I may have a season of weeping, but I'm going to have a season followed with laughter. I may have a season of deep, deep grief, but I will have a season of dance and celebration. Psalm 30 simply says, weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Again, he continues on. Time to scatter stones and a time to... You can do better than that. Come on, everybody participate here. A time to... And a time to embrace and a time to... Here we have two things of work and actually love. Stones are no fun. As a matter of fact, tour guides, I've heard this, I've not been told this, but I've heard this, that tour guides in Israel will tell the story to those who come and visit and tour the Jerusalem in that area, that God gave a bunch of stones to an angel to scatter them amongst the earth, but unfortunately they tripped over Palestine and all of them just poured out into that area. They said there's just so many rocks everywhere. And so for them to even plant or the garden, stones have to be removed. You can't produce a crop without digging and moving out stones. And every year, removing stones is a part of life. It's a part of the process. They were also a part, then those stones used to create fences and to create barriers. It was for building, and it was important for them to use those. There's different seasons for those types of things. And it was a time to embrace and a time to refrain. Gentlemen, we know that one, right? For we are married. You know there's a season when you come home and you've done something you shouldn't have done and you guys aren't, it's not one of those days, and you come in and you go, oh, probably not a good day for a hug or something right now. We probably should talk. You know what I'm saying? You know they're in the refrain. But yes, there's also a season of embracing one another and loving one another. There's a time when friends should engage each other. Matter of fact, embracing can actually mean as much as simply as a hello. Culturally, we embrace to some degree. Hispanic cultures embrace fully. In other words, touching cheeks, and there's this embrace. Many cultures embrace each other. And then a refrain is just simply sometimes a time that we don't embrace. There's a time that we don't find that we are engaged in friendship really well. Those are hard seasons, but they're true. Next, he says a time to search and a time to keep and a time to. This is a good one to remember in spring, isn't it, for all of our households? A time to search and a time to give up and a time to keep and a time to throw away. What do you lose the most? What do you lose the most? What do you find yourself looking for the most in your life? What? Phone. How many phone? What else? Keys. What? Sisters? Is that what you... Scissors. Scissors. Yeah. I'm up there with the phone, right, honey? What did I do with it? What did I do with it? I'm always looking. We're always searching for things. We're always looking for something else. And yet there's also a time to simply give up. This is a hard one for us to do because I think that there's a lot of times we search for things we don't need to search for. I think there's seasons in our life that we search and want certain things that we probably shouldn't want. And as we evaluate life, as we mature, as we think there's a time to give up. You know, there's nothing wrong with chasing your dreams. And I know some people have chased dreams, of childhood dreams, and have met them. And there's some that you know, you think about certain dreams and you never met them. And there may be some degree of difficulty or disappointment that we may have in that. But there's also a season in our life that I want this for my identity. I want this kind of house. I want this kind of car. I want this kind of bride. I want this. And all of a sudden we search and search. And then there's a time to go, you know, I just need to give up on that because it doesn't have the value that I initially thought it had when I began my search. I need to learn to give up on some things. I need to learn to give up on pursuing things I maybe shouldn't pursue. And yet there's also times, there's a time to keep things and there's a time to throw them away. There's a time to get rid of things. And that's hard for us to do, some harder than others. And yet this is what we wrestle with. Again, a time to tear and a time to be silent and a time to. I probably shouldn't say anything from now on. I should just be quiet because but that wouldn't be very, very interesting. But this is, personal here. There's a time to tear. This tear is a mourning, a grieving. In the Jewish culture, the tearing of clothing was a time of great mourning. They would throw ashes upon themselves. And this time of mending and bringing back together. And I wish I could continue to learn the discipline of being silent. And it's discipline of speaking when I need to. Because there's times I should speak and I'm silent, and there's times I'm silent and I should speak. And I think we all deal with those issues. We have more here. A time to love and a time for war and a time for... All of these things are in our world. They're around us. They're a part of us. And there is a time to love. And we think, is this being a proponent of hate? Not at all. Again, Solomon is observing the world. And what he says, even in our Christian walk, there are certain things God has called us to hate. There are certain things that we are to hate sin. We are to repel. It's repulsive to us. As a matter of fact, even when we see injustice in the world, part of us, it responds not only out of love for somebody, but we also respond out of a hate for what is occurring. If someone is being served an injustice, is being treated poorly, is being beat up along the side of a road, we hate what we see, right? And because we love humanity, we may engage in that. And because it moves us. There's a little bit of both of those emotions, love and hate, in compassion. I hate the condition you're in, so I want to do something about it. And I want to help change that. I want to help come along. I want to engage you in my world. I want to engage you in my life. Why? Because that's a part of transition and changing in our own life, in our own world. And those are seasons. And of course, we know that there's The history of mankind, war and peace, have been ebbing and flowing, up and down. They're chasing. And even this morning, you're probably in some of these we've mentioned. And it's hard. We move in and out of them. In the midst of them, they do form us, as I talked about earlier. And that's why Solomon, again, begins to poke his head above the clouds, above the sun, and seeing what has God set in place? What has God done in all this? And he begins to share with us that the things that seem to be so bad aren't really that bad, that there's goodness in it. I remember a season of our life. It was actually, I don't know how many years ago. Beth will probably give me a year as I speak, but it was about this time of year. Kylie was a senior. What year? 2008, that long ago. Our youngest daughter was a senior. We were trying to get our house ready for open house. Our youngest daughter, trying to, all the senior type stuff. At the same time, my father had 6 bypass surgery, and he was in Branson, Missouri. He was a man who had Alzheimer's at that time, and he was basically on a ventilator and could not come off the ventilator, and never did come off the ventilator. He went to be home with Jesus a few months later, but he was in the hospital in Branson, Missouri. Beth's mom was in the process of dealing with cancer and was actually struggling with that and was in hospice care at that time. And it actually, I believe, had actually been also down to Tennessee on a trip and had gotten very, very ill. And she was having to deal with that. I also at that time, we also were blessed at that time to have an adopted lady in my adopted mom, is who I'll call her. Her name is Clara. That was 97. And at that time, and I had gone to Missouri to see my dad, came home from Missouri and went to Joe check in on Clara, and Clara had actually fallen and had been on our floor in her house for 2 days. And so at that moment, that was the last time Clara was in her house. I became her power of attorney. When she was in the hospital, Beth was dealing with her mom that was in Tennessee. I was trying to deal with my dad, and Kylie, our youngest, was trying to graduate. That's when you're glad it's a season. And I looked at that, and I remember the emotions of that moment. I remember the tears of being overwhelmed in that moment. I'm thinking, this is not good. And I'm still going to say that part of that was not good, by all means. But there's a whole lot of good in that. There's a lot of good because it allowed me to see how good God was to allow us to handle things that were overwhelming to us and we didn't know we could deal with. 2, it allowed me to grow in a way of loving somebody that I had never been forced to love somebody. To give out, to pour myself out to a point of exhaustion, all because I loved Dad, loved Mom, loved Clara, loved our daughter, and being pulled in every direction. And there's this pulling, and it stretched our heart, it stretched our mind, it stretched our energy, and everything about it became something at the moment didn't feel very good, but it became very good because it allowed me to understand that I can love at a larger capacity than what I think I can. It pushed me, it forced me. And I think that when we deal with those struggles, those are part of life. We're all going to deal with those difficulties. It takes us to a new place of trusting and refines us, as Peter says, to a place that my faith is, I depend on you. It's not someone else's faith, it's my faith. And that's where we see here when Solomon, out of all of this, he declares God's timing is beautiful. We probably would like to wrestle with that with him a little bit, wouldn't we? But what I get to is when I look at that, what I see in his beauty is this. God's timing is beautiful. There are certain things we should be living in the order as God intends it to live. And when I start to create my own order of life, what I think we should do about my life should be about, then all of a sudden my life becomes more and more of a mess because I'm not realizing that God, my designer, God who loves me, has said there's things that are in place and in time. And when you live them according to my will, his good and perfect will, then all of a sudden there's beauty in it. Even though there's hardship, even though there's difficulty, there is this great beauty. Maybe hard to see at the moment, but it's great beauty because Solomon goes on to say in that moment, listen, we cannot comprehend the fullness of what God has done from the beginning. We're only a small blip of his eternal time frame. And so either I try to control myself, this time frame of my life, or I simply entrust myself to the one who's written the time frame. and has the timing down and go, that's beautiful. It didn't look beautiful here, but now I look at it and go, that's beautiful. I think we all have those same stories in our heart and mind. God's timing is beautiful. And he ends with this, and I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this today because part 2 of the sermon is next week and deal more of this, that God has placed eternity in our hearts. In the midst of all this time struggle, he's placed this eternity in the hearts of man. We long for the eternal. And I think that when we look at life and get so frustrated, it's because all we do, we see all this temporariness of life, the season. But deep inside of each one of us, God has set this longing for eternity, things that last. As we walk as disciples, as we struggle, let us think through life. Let's look at our life and begin processing. God, how am I living in a way that comes alongside of you and flourishes in this area of eternity? Jesus makes it real simple for us. Everything seems simple, a beginning and an end. We live, we die. But Jesus says those who believe in him, though they die, shall live. That's beautiful. And that's the hope Jesus offers to us. That's what he offers us today. So in and out of those seasons, let us remember, let us allow God to refine us, and let us pursue him. Let's pray.